The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before the noise of the world wakes up. The air smelled of wet grass, and a thin mist hung low over the street. I stood barefoot on the cold concrete, watering the small patch of flowers by my porch. The steady hiss of the hose was almost meditative. Then a shadow broke across the lawn. At first, I thought it was a jogger, but the rhythm of the footsteps, sharp, deliberate, told a different story. When I looked up, there he was, Harold Connors, the HOA president. Clipboard in hand, polo tucked too tight, that smug little smirk like he owned every brick on this street. He didn't bother with a greeting. "You're in violation of subsection 9B, he announced, tone clipped and rehearsed. "That hose isn't approved for external visibility." I blinked at him, the water still running over the marigold. "Subsection what now?" He clicked his pen, scribbling something. "9B drainage and property aesthetics. You'll need to remove it by end of day, or I'll have to issue a penalty." I couldn't help but smile a little. Mind citing where that's written? That got under his skin. His lips tightened, eyes flicking toward my house like he expected a crowd to gather. "Don't make this difficult," he said, voice dropping into that fake authority tone. "You people never read your own rules." From the corner of my eye, I caught the blinds moving across the street. Mrs. Fowler's place. Then another window and another. Neighbors pretending not to stare but watching every second. Small-town theater. I was the morning's entertainment. Harold puffed out his chest and started circling the hose like it was some kind of evidence. He snapped photos on his phone, each flash punctuated by a note on his clipboard. "You've been warned about noncompliance before," he muttered. I let him talk. His words bounced off the quiet like static. The water from the hose ran down the edge of the lawn, glinting in the pale sunlight. He crouched down, inspecting the connection at the faucet, as if trying to find proof of a crime. "That looks like a non-standard attachment," he said. "It's just a nozzle," I replied evenly. "Home Depot, $20. He straightened, satisfied with his discovery, and clicked his pen again. "Expect an official notice by mail," he said. "Failure to comply may result in penalties or property access for correction." There it was, the threat. The sentence he loved to say. Property access. I'd seen him use it before, walking into people's yards while quoting bylaws that didn't exist. "Harold," I said, calm as the morning air, "you don't have authority to step onto my property. You know that, right?" He laughed, the kind of laugh meant to humiliate. "Authority comes with responsibility, Mr. Reed. Something you seem to misunderstand." I looked at him, really looked at him. The slicked hair, the little badge-shaped sticker on his shirt that looked official from a distance but was just printed paper. "You take your job very seriously," I said. He smiled proudly. "Someone has to keep order around here." "Right," I said softly, turning the hose off. "And someone has to know when you're overstepping." The silence that followed was heavier than it should have been. A car passed at the end of the street, slow and curious. The blinds twitched again. The whole neighborhood was listening now, even if they pretended they weren't. Harold adjusted his clipboard. "Final warning," he said. "Remove the hose by sundown." He started walking away, muttering something about non-compliance. I didn't reply. Just watched him leave, that stiff, self-important walk, like a soldier marching off after declaring victory. When he reached the sidewalk, he turned slightly, just enough to make sure I was still watching. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he called. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The morning quiet returned, broken only by the faint buzz of a lawnmower a few houses down. I coiled the hose slowly, feeling the chill of the metal faucet against my fingers. For a long moment I just stood there, breathing. Then, out of habit, I looked up at the corner of the porch. A small red light blinked steadily on the camera I'd installed last month. Recording. Every word. Every smirk. Every lie. I exhaled, slow and steady, and murmured to myself, "Let's see how this one plays out." The first letter came 3 days later. plain white envelope, HOA seal printed slightly crooked in the corner. Inside, a single sheet of paper, stiff with self-importance. Notice of violation. Unauthorized exterior modification. Fine. $150. I read it twice, then set it beside the coffee maker. By the end of the week, there were 3 more. Each one angrier, each one quoting a new bylaw I'd never seen before. The fines climbed with every envelope. $150 became $300, then $450. They all carried the same signature: Harold Connors, HOA President. At night, I sat at the kitchen table, bills and letters spread out like a war map. The ticking clock on the wall kept time with the ache building behind my eyes. I could almost hear Harold's voice between the printed lines, smug, satisfied. Out the window, porch lights flicked off one by one. My neighbors weren't blind. They'd seen him patrol my yard with that clipboard, snapping photos like some self-appointed sheriff. But no one said a word. Not to me, at least. By the following Monday, the whispers had started. As I stepped out to take the trash, Mrs. Fowler from across the street pulled her dog away quickly. "Morning," I said. She just nodded and hurried off. A man watering his lawn looked up, hesitated, and turned his hose away. Later, I overheard him mutter to someone, "They'll tow his car next, you watch." It was strange how fast people changed when fear entered the picture. One rumor, one false story, and suddenly I was the problem neighbor. That night, I sat at my table again, the letters forming a neat, damning pile. I took photos of each one. Then I photographed my mailbox, the timestamps on the envelopes, even the return address labels. Every little thing documented, dated, stored. The emails came next. Harold's tone had evolved from formal to personal. Failure to cooperate may result in HOA corrective action. Your behavior is creating unnecessary tension in the community. As president, I reserve the right to ensure compliance by any means necessary. Any means necessary. I printed them all. My printer whirred through the night, spitting out paper after paper, while my coffee went cold beside it. 2 days later, the knock came again. It wasn't just Harold this time. He brought backup, 2 men in matching navy jackets, both wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. One of them flashed something shiny and square before slipping it back into his pocket. From a distance, it might have looked like a badge. Harold's voice carried that same oily confidence. "Last warning," he said. "You've ignored repeated notices. We have authority to enter and remove the violation." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my tone calm. Authority granted by whom? The taller man behind him shifted his stance, as if expecting resistance. Harold's eyes narrowed. "Don't test me," he snapped. "I run this community." That was the line. The same one he'd used before. The same one I'd been waiting to hear again. This time, in full color on my porch camera. "Then you know the rules," I said evenly. "Step off my property." His jaw tightened. "This isn't over," he said, scribbling something on his clipboard. "Expect an escalation." He turned sharply and walked away, his 2 enforcers following like silent shadows. I watched them go until they turned the corner, then glanced toward the camera light again, red and blinking. Later that evening, as I sat at the table, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should see this." Attached was a shaky video, dark, grainy, filmed through blinds. The glow of a porch light flickered across Harold's face as he crouched in my yard. He was holding something, a coil of green hose, dragging it toward the street. My stomach sank, then hardened into something colder. He'd crossed the line. And this time I had proof. The morning air carried that faint metallic chill that comes right before the sun burns off the dew. I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, ready to water the garden, only to stop cold at the edge of the porch. The hose was gone. Only a trail of muddy footprints remained, pressed deep into the damp grass. The earth near the faucet was scuffed, the nozzle detached and left hanging loose like a severed limb. My stomach tightened, not in surprise, but in confirmation. He'd actually done it. The neighborhood was already awake. Across the street, a pair of retirees stood beside their mailbox, pretending to chat but glancing my way every few seconds. I heard one of them murmur, "Guess he finally got rid of that eyesore." The other snorted softly. "About time. Harold doesn't play around." I didn't respond. I just knelt down, touched the wet imprint of a shoe print. It was small, Harold's probably. The man wore loafers to everything, even yard patrols. Inside, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the camera feed. The footage loaded slowly, minute by minute. Then there it was, 2:14 a.m. The porch light flickered once, like a warning. A figure crept into frame, careful, cautious. The video went grainy for 3 seconds, then black. When it resumed, the hose was gone, and a faint reflection of movement flickered in the chrome of my neighbor's parked car. I paused, zoomed in. In the reflection, caught just right by the streetlight, was the outline of a logo on the thief's shirt. HOA Maintenance Committee. He had unplugged the camera before stealing the evidence, but not before leaving proof behind. I leaned back, exhaled slowly, then clicked download. Every frame, every second backed up to my drive. The video wasn't perfect, but it was enough. That afternoon, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. I already knew the smell of that cheap ink. Notice: unauthorized exterior equipment has been removed under HOA Property Maintenance Clause 14C, fine, $600. Do not reinstall without approval. I read it once, then again. Clause 14C. Another ghost rule. I set the letter down on the counter and poured another cup of coffee. My pulse didn't even spike this time. Just a quiet certainty settling in. By noon, I was on the phone. "County Sheriff's Office," the dispatcher answered. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'd like to file a theft report." A pause. "What was taken?" "A garden hose," I said. "By my HOA president. I have partial footage." There was another pause, this one longer. I could almost hear the smile through the line. "All right, sir. We can send an officer to take your statement. Do you have proof?" "Enough," I said. "Enough to make him sweat." When the deputy arrived, he wasn't in a rush. Older guy, hat low, name tag reading R. Coleman. He stepped out of his truck, nodded politely, and asked to see the footage. I played it for him on the porch. The black screen, the flicker, the reflection. He watched quietly, arms crossed. "Yeah," he finally said. "That's theft, all right. Tampering with a recording device, too." He took down notes, asked a few details, then tilted his head. "You said this guy's the HOA president?" "Yep." "Connors." I blinked. "You know him?" A slow grin spread across his face. "Actually," he said, closing his notebook, "I do. That's my cousin's neighborhood. Been hearing stories about him for years." The calm I'd been holding finally cracked, just a little. "So, you believe me?" "Oh, I believe you," he said, tucking his pen behind his ear. "And something tells me he's not gonna like who he hears from next." He gave me a small nod, tipped his hat, and walked back to his truck. The door shut with a solid thunk, and the engine rumbled to life. As he drove off down the street, a few curtains twitched open again, faces briefly visible before vanishing. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance shift. Harold had taken a hose. But he'd also left something behind: evidence, arrogance, and a trail of his own footprints leading straight to justice. And now, someone else cared. The living room didn't look like a living room anymore. It looked like a case file. The coffee table was buried under open folders, printed emails, and a mess of sticky note. Every letter Harold had sent me was lined up chronologically. Every timestamp, every photograph, and every rulebook excerpt had a place. My laptop sat in the center of it all, its glow painting the room in quiet blue light. The air was still except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Outside, the neighborhood slept. Inside, I built a case. I started with the letters. scanning through them one by one, comparing language, fonts, and headers. The signatures didn't even match. The first few letters had a clean, blocky signature. The later ones, scrawled and sloppy, were clearly rushed. Then I noticed something else. The bylaws he kept citing had different formatting, different wording. I opened the official HOA handbook PDF on my screen, the version archived by the county. Then I pulled up the one Harold had been handing out door to door, the one labeled Updated 2024 Revision. There it was, Section 9B. Except it didn't exist in the county's version. It had been inserted halfway through a paragraph in Harold's updated version, wedged between genuine clauses. It wasn't official. It wasn't even legal. Just something he'd written himself. I sat back, ran a hand over my face, and let the weight of it settle. He hadn't just bent the rules, he'd created them. On the floor beside me were photos from the day he showed up with those two inspectors. I zoomed in on one frame where one of them flashed his badge. The seal was crooked, the text slightly blurred. A printed emblem from some generic template site, laminated and punched through with a metal clip. Fake. I sorted them into folders: letters, photos, timeline, laws. Each one labeled, cross-referenced, backed up twice. If Harold wanted to play official, I could play procedural. By midnight, I noticed the email. It was from the HOA board, subject line in all caps, emergency meeting notice. They were calling a vote. My repeated hostility and failure to cooperate were being cited as grounds for termination of community privileges, which was their polite way of saying eviction. I almost laughed. After everything, he still thought he was untouchable. So I opened a new folder. This one titled Public Record. Inside, I clipped the cleanest 30 seconds from the porch footage. The moment he said it. I run this community. The audio was sharp, the camera catching just enough of his smug grin. I uploaded the clip to a private online forum for local homeowners. The kind where people vent about bad management and shady HOAs. I didn't write a caption, didn't name names. I just posted the clip with a timestamp and location tag blurred. For a while, nothing happened. I sat there in the quiet, eyes burning from the screen light, waiting for something. A comment, a notification, anything. Then the first reply appeared. Oh, him. We've had complaints about that guy before. A second message followed. Then a dozen more. Someone mentioned they recognized the logo on his shirt. Another said their own HOA president had tried the same fake citation trick. By 3 a.m., the post wasn't private anymore. Someone had re-uploaded it to social media. The caption read, HOA president caught stealing from resident, says, I run this community. When I woke up a few hours later, the video had over 50,000 views. My phone buzzed non-stop. Notifications, comments, messages from neighbors who suddenly wanted to talk. Half of them claimed they'd always suspected Harold was crooked. The other half were asking if I planned to sue. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat on the couch, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm, staring at the small screen that had just flipped the balance of power. They wanted attention, I said quietly to myself. Now they have it. From the doorway, my next-door neighbor, Tom, leaned in, still half in his work uniform. You really posted it? He asked. I gave him a faint smile. Just the part where he says, I run this community. He let out a low whistle. He's gonna lose it when he sees that. Good, I said. Let him. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops when my phone buzzed again. A new message, not from social media this time. The preview line made my pulse hitch. County investigator wants to meet. Says it's about your HOA president. I stared at the message, feeling the quiet hum of anticipation beneath my calm. Harold had built his little empire on paper and pretense. Now, the county was about to start reading. The HOA community center smelled faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee, the kind of stale air that made tension feel thicker. Rows of metal folding chairs faced a long table draped in a cheap blue cloth. Every seat was taken. The rest of the crowd stood pressed against the walls, phones in hand, whispering like a storm about to break. I could feel the eyes on me the moment I walked in. Some curious, some wary, a few quietly hopeful. The story had already spread. The clip had gone viral in our own backyard, and everyone wanted to see what would happen when Harold Connors, self-proclaimed ruler of the neighborhood, tried to clean up the mess he made. At the front of the room, Harold shuffled papers with theatrical frustration, pretending to be busy. His usual smugness was cracking. The skin under his collar was blotchy red. A water bottle trembled slightly in his hand. "All right," he began, his voice straining to sound steady, "let's maintain order. This is a standard procedural meeting. There's been a lot of misinformation circulating online, and we will be addressing it professionally." The murmurs didn't stop. Someone whispered, "Professionally, huh?" and a few quiet laughs followed. Harold glanced up sharply. "Please," he said, palms raised. "Phones away. No recording." No one obeyed. The phones only lifted higher. I sat near the back, watching him sweat through his collared shirt. He looked at me once, then quickly away. The stack of papers I carried rested quietly in my lap, neat, labeled lethal. He began droning on about respect for community guidelines, flipping through slides no one cared about. His voice carried the practiced rhythm of control, but the control wasn't his anymore. Then, halfway through his speech, the door opened. A man in a gray suit stepped in, calm but deliberate. He carried a leather folder under one arm and flashed a county badge as he approached the front table. "Good evening," he said. "Detective Langford, County Investigations." The room fell dead silent. Harold blinked, his mouth opening and closing twice before words formed. "Detective, I wasn't aware." "That's the point," Langford said smoothly. "I wasn't invited. But after a few complaints, I figured I should see how this HOA operates." He set his folder on the table with a soft thud. Every eye in the room was on him now. Harold tried to recover. "This meeting is for residents only. And I'm here because of residents," Langford cut in. "Mind if we clear a few things up before you continue?" The silence stretched. Harold's jaw worked, but he didn't dare say no. Langford turned to me. "Mr. Reed." I stood. "Right here. Would you come up, please?" Every step toward the front felt slow, deliberate. The crowd shifted, phones tracking me like lenses in a courtroom. When I reached the table, Langford nodded for me to lay it all out. I placed the stack of papers in front of him. The letters, the photos, the 2 versions of the bylaws. "These are copies of every notice I've received," I said quietly. "And this," I slid a page forward, "is the original HOA handbook, verified by the county. The version distributed by Mr. Connors here includes an entire fabricated section, 9B, used to fine and threaten residents." Langford's brow lifted. "Fabricated?" "Yes, sir. The county never approved it. The edits were uploaded from his personal account." A ripple went through the crowd, gasps, murmurs, the soft hiss of whispered "I knew it." Harold stammered, "This is ridiculous. Those are outdated drafts. You can't prove intent." Langford flipped a page, his eyes landing on a printed email header. "Actually," he said, "your name appears right here. You sent this draft with a note. Use this to enforce compliance. Don't worry, no one checks the county site." The color drained from Harold's face. He tried to laugh, but it came out dry. "That doesn't mean anything. Anyone could've." I interrupted softly, "Actually, you signed it." The crowd exhaled all at once, that sharp intake that comes before a verdict. Phones tilted forward, catching every twitch of his jaw. Langford leaned closer. "So you created false enforcement documents?" Harold's voice cracked. "I was maintaining order. You have no idea how hard it is to manage." Langford held up a hand. "What I have," he said firmly, "is probable cause." The room erupted in low whispers. Someone in the back whispered, "He's done." Harold straightened, trying to recover the authority he no longer had. This is outrageous. You can't humiliate me in front of my own community. Langford calmly opened the folder he'd brought, revealing more papers, official ones, stamped and signed. Funny thing, Mr. Connors, he said, his voice cool as stone. You're not the first HOA president we've looked into. Harold froze. What do you mean? Langford turned slightly toward the crowd, letting his words land one by one. We've been tracking complaints, he said, flipping another page. 5 other neighborhoods, all tied to your company's name. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone's phone slipped from their hand and clattered against the floor. For the first time, Harold didn't speak. His clipboard lay forgotten on the table, and the only sound left in the room was the quiet click of cameras recording every second of his fall. The same community hall looked different now. The bright fluorescent lights no longer buzzed over Harold's voice, they hummed over silence. Every seat was filled again, but this time no one whispered. No one dared. The air felt charged, waiting for a sentence to fall. Harold sat at the table, face pale, collar open, eyes darting between the detective and the cluster of board members who now avoided looking at him. His clipboard was gone. His weapon of choice replaced by a thin manila envelope labeled evidence. Detective Langford stood before the crowd with the steady poise of someone used to endings. After reviewing the submitted documents and recorded footage, he began, his voice carrying to the back of the room. The county is issuing immediate charges against Harold Connors for fraud, impersonation of authority, and petty theft. The words landed like hammer blows. A few gasps echoed from the back. One board member slowly removed her HOA badge, setting it on the table as if it were suddenly radioactive. Another stood, muttered something about not being part of this, and walked straight out the door. Phones were up again, no shame now. Neighbors recorded openly, some shaking their heads, others murmuring quiet vindication. Harold tried to speak, but his throat betrayed him. The first sound came out as a rasp. He cleared it, then forced a bitter laugh. You can't be serious. This is a witch hunt. Langford turned toward him. It's a lawful investigation. I built this community. Harold snapped, slamming his palm on the table. You think any of them would have had order without me? Langford's expression didn't change. You're done, he said simply. Step back. 2 uniformed officers moved closer. The scrape of their boots on the floor was the only sound as they positioned themselves at either side of him. Harold's glare found me then, sharp, venomous. You'll regret crossing me, he hissed. I held his gaze, voice steady, quiet. No, I said. I documented crossing you. The crowd reacted before I did, a few quiet chuckles, then murmured words of approval. Someone near the front whispered, about time. Langford nodded to the officers. They guided Harold up from his chair, his resistance half-hearted now. His arrogance had drained away, replaced with the stunned stillness of someone realizing their control was gone. As they led him down the aisle, the crowd instinctively parted. A few people lowered their heads, others held their phones higher. The only thing louder than the clicking cameras was the silence between them. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slow. Deliberate. It echoed through the room like punctuation. Another joined in, then another, until the hall was filled with applause, not joyful, not mocking, just final. Harold kept his head down as he was escorted out, the sound following him like a verdict. When the door closed, the applause faded to stillness. Langford gathered his files, gave me a short nod, and said quietly, You did good keeping your cool. I returned the nod, folding my hands on the table. It wasn't about winning, I said. Just setting things right. He smiled faintly. That's what justice looks like when it's done properly. As the crowd began to disperse, my phone buzzed. A new message. Legal firm wants to represent your case. And by the way, your video just hit 1 million views. I looked at the screen, the hum of the room fading behind me. The story wasn't just local anymore. It had gone everywhere. and Harold Connor's empire of control had finally collapsed in front of the very people he ruled. The garden looked the way it used to, maybe even better. Morning light spilled over the fence, catching the drops of water clinging to a brand new hose coiled neatly beside the faucet. The grass shimmered, the air smelled of wet soil, and for the first time in weeks, the only sound was birdsong. Out front, news vans were lined along the curb. A cluster of reporters leaned on their tripods, microphones ready, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I let them wait. The headline on one of the van's screens read, "HOA President Charged After Viral Video." A small victory, maybe, but one that carried weight. I poured a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. A few neighbors stood across the street, hesitant, like they were approaching a monument they weren't sure they deserved to see. One of them, Mrs. Fowler, walked over slowly, holding a second cup of coffee. She looked older in the morning light, softer somehow. "You really took him down," she said. I smiled politely, shaking my head. "No. He recorded himself doing it." She let out a small laugh, part relief, part guilt. "Guess we all saw what we wanted to see. Some of us just didn't want trouble." "Trouble doesn't disappear when you ignore it," I said quietly. "It just gets louder." She nodded, pressing the warm cup into my hand, then walked back to her lawn, joining a small circle of neighbors chatting in low, relieved tones. I turned back to my porch camera, reattaching it to its usual corner. I adjusted the lens slightly, pointing it toward the street this time. Habit, not paranoia, just preparation. The small red light blinked on again, steady and calm. Justice, I'd learned, isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or headlines that last forever. It's patient. It's a steady light that never blinks off, even when no one's watching. A mail truck slowed in front of my house. The carrier waved, handed me a thick envelope, and drove off. The seal at the top read County Legal Office. Inside was a short letter stamped in bold. Settlement approval. Property restored, damages awarded. No drama, no courtroom scenes. Just paper, quiet, powerful paper. From the yard, Tom called out, "So, you gonna frame that thing?" I grinned. "Might just laminate it instead." Behind him, a young reporter approached, microphone in hand, cameraman following. "Mr. Reed," she said, all practice charm. "Would you say this was revenge?" I looked past her camera at the quiet street, the trimmed hedges, the sunlight, the new hose glinting like a line drawn under the whole story. "No," I said softly. "Just accountability." She smiled, lowering the mic. "That's a good line." "It's the truth," I replied, then turned away. As I stepped back into my yard, the air felt lighter. The fear that used to hang over the neighborhood was gone, replaced by something quieter. Respect, maybe. Understanding. But just as I was about to head inside, something caught my eye. A black SUV rolled slowly past the driveway, its windows tinted dark. It didn't stop, just lingered for a moment, engine humming. Through the glass, I could make out the faint silhouette of a man holding a clipboard. The vehicle turned the corner and disappeared. I stared for a moment, then glanced at the blinking red light of my camera. Justice might be patient, but so was vigilance.